Welcome to Lead Out Loud, the podcast from Warwick Business School, where bold ideas, groundbreaking leadership, and core insights come together. I'm your host, Bron Mills, and in each episode, we dive deep into the strategies, stories, and science behind leading with a purpose and passion. So today we're discussing one of the most important and relevant topics in leadership at the moment, and that's the value of diversity. So how can embracing diverse perspectives transform organisations and drive that success? So joining me are two incredible guests, Elham Fardad, a senior leader at Ernst and founder of Migrant Leaders, and Dawn Eubanks, an associate professor at Warwick Business School and expert in behavioural science. So today we'll be diving into the transformative power of diversity in leadership and how it strengthens decision-making, fuels innovation, and fosters resilience. And don't forget the bottom line at the end of this episode, where we'll provide practical strategies for building diverse and inclusive teams. So firstly, I'd like to introduce you to Elham Fardad. Welcome. Can you give us a brief overview of yourself and what's brought you to this position?
Thank you so much. Some of it was planned and some of it wasn't. We migrated from Iran to the UK at the height of Iran-Iraq war. I remember more or less every night there were sirens going on and bombardments. We had to turn all the lights off, rush to the basement, which was full of cockroaches, and stay there until the bombing would stop. It would go on sometimes for what seemed to be an hours, going boom, boom,
and
boom, boom.
How old were you?
I was around, the war was since I was 7 years old until I was 13 years old, when we came at the height of the war to the UK. Mm. And I remember thinking as a 9, 10, 11-year-old, right, I can either be scared of the bombing every time it goes boom, and then you hear the anti-aircraft missiles going shoo, 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 shoo. Or I could make use of my time. So I did a lot of extra homework under candlelight those nights during those bombings. And as a result, when we came to the UK when I was 13, I was academically very strong. So I felt quite confident, and I thought in the UK, this will now be the environment where I will flourish. As my father used to say, this is information society. There's so much you can learn in this country, and you are now part of this country, he said, and you should contribute to the UK. So I started with that in mind, and by the time I was 18, I had lost everything. My family separated, and I had my little brother to look after. And I had just my academic ability going for me, but more on that later.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, so thank you so much for joining. And Dawn, how did you come to develop this area of interest as an academic?
Well, gosh, that's an incredible story that you just told. I think that my journey is probably a little less exciting than that. Where I grew up, there wasn't a lot of diversity. I grew up in a very small town in the Midwest, and probably the most exotic person was my mother, who was from England. But there wasn't a lot of difference. There wasn't a lot of diversity where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And then when I went to university, I had the chance to live in an international dorm. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I'm going to get to meet people from everywhere, which I did. And it just completely opened my eyes. And it made me think about everything differently. And it made me question things that I'd just taken for granted before. So it was an incredibly eye-opening experience. And I realized, how much there is to gain from learning about people's stories and their differences, and just spending time doing that and listening. And so I guess that was a real pivotal moment for me that kind of made me interested in learning more about it. And then, if you fast forward many, many years into being an academic, I've become interested in diversity and leadership and that space now from a couple different perspectives. One is from a creativity perspective. So we know that if you've got lots of different voices and perspectives in the room, that you can come up with more creative and innovative solutions for a problem because people are looking at it in different ways. And then secondly is just as a female, that and a mother, I kind of see some of the challenges that people in my demographic face. And so I guess I just want to learn more about that and trying to figure out how we can empower and give tools to try to make sure that everybody has that equal shot, and we can figure out ways to remove obstacles. So that's my interest.
Well, no, I love it. And I think that leadership in that context has so much power. If we think about obstacles and the obstacles that you had to go through in your journey, it's the leaders of the country, I guess, are putting those obstacles in place. And had you not put that work in, pre-arriving, then your story could have been quite different from the age of 18, because you went on to be the youngest person to ever do an exec MBA course at Warwick Business School. And that's huge. But again, you had to fight for that, right? And that must have come from a place of self-belief.
It did, but credit to University of Warwick, because they listened to me. When I applied at the age of 25, and I insisted that it has to be an executive MBA because I wanted to hang around with what I called older people. The average age was 33 for an exec MBA. I thought that a 33-year-old is so experienced, I want to hang around with them. So I had just started my financial controller job at GE. And I was acutely aware that GE had given me a big mandate as a 25-year-old female Iranian to help integrate a newly acquired business into GE's way of doing things. And I was acutely aware that whilst I might be a technically good finance person, I actually knew nothing about marketing strategy, operations management, and a lot of the themes I was hearing from other members of the management team at GE. So Warwick came at a really good time. They did, in fact, initially reject my application to the executive MBA. But having gone through certain things in my life, for instance, at 18, I had to camp outside Birmingham City Council offices for 3 days until someone would agree to take me into the building so I can pitch to them about why I'm a home student.
Wow.
And it worked, which meant the British government paid for my university degree. So having done things like that, by 25, I knew that I should at least try to talk to someone at Warwick. And credit to Warwick University. They listened when I said, I understand the reasons why you've rejected my application because of lack of years of experience for the executive MBA, but could I please have an interview? And if the answer is still no, then fair enough. And they agreed to that. So credit to them for keeping an open mind to the diverse talent that could enter their MBA program. I had a 90-minute, what I can call a conversation with a professor, and it was so enjoyable. And towards the end of the 90-minute conversation, I forgot this is in effect an interview. And he's kind of smiled and he said, you realize you're going to be the youngest ever executive MBA at Warwick University. And I said, does that mean I'm in? and he said yes.
Amazing.
So I have been very lucky, and I can name so many individuals who've supported me on that journey. So very grateful to be here. Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. And like I say, your story is absolutely one of resilience, right? And I think that everything that you've overcome and kind of fought for, right, is not lucky. Like you've really kind of worked at that, and it's demonstrated some incredible stuff. So that has led you then to start Migrant Leaders.
Yes.
So can you tell a bit about what that does, and then what kind of leadership in that space means to you?
Yes, Migrant Leaders was a bit of a detour, and yet it was meant to be, because I was following my career plan, the vision and steps and roadmap I had in my mind, kind of doing the financial controller job at GE, then becoming a finance director, in News Corp, and then entering the Big Four finance advisory, 10 years in EY. So that was all working very well, and I quite frankly very much liked it. And EY had very family-friendly policies and practices, so they were very supportive of me being a young mum with 2 growing children, and my husband also in Accenture, so he was traveling a lot. So EY was very supportive of me and flexible with me, given my family considerations. So I was perfectly happy. But something was missing, and I honestly couldn't tell what it was. And as luck would have it, around the same few weeks that I was feeling that way, something landed in my inbox. It was the Parker Review, back in 2017. And the Parker Review looked at the ethnic diversity of UK boardrooms. I got curious after a few nights of reading the report thoroughly. And I thought, let's dig into the data. I put 1,086 lines on a spreadsheet, this director citizens of color. And I actually cut the data in a different way. I discovered that only 1.3% of directors of color in the UK were migrants, and of those migrant directors, all but one person were privately educated.
Wow.
So I realized, so the root cause of ethnic diversity is more complex than that. There's a huge social mobility angle. I went to 3 status schools in 3 years in Birmingham. So in that moment, I realized the odds were against me even more than I thought at the time. So I thought, that's it, I've got to do something about this. And that's why in 2017, I registered Migrant Leaders with the Charity Commission. And 7 years on, we now have 2,000 senior mentors from 95 FTSE 100, Fortune 500 and leading firms, 2,000 mentors. And we've got 3,500 mentees, which we match to the mentees based on the mentees' career aspirations and development needs. We also have corporate partnerships with 25 fantastic companies like Anglo-American, Smith & Nephew, Kantar, ABB, and so many others, Infinium, in every sector. And we are expanding on those now.
And it's incredible, and that to be the turning point and the moment is so poignant, isn't it, Dawn? I mean, your research, you've looked at, I'm sure, board members and who makes up these boards and who makes up these senior positions, and I mean, what does that look like in modern UK? Is there enough diversity?
I don't think that there is. I think that, it's kind of very, very slowly getting better, but it's painfully slow. And, you kind of wonder, right now, kind of how are things going to continue to change, and is there going to be a backlash? And there's quite a bit of uncertainty at the moment, I guess, in terms of how things in the UK are going to move forward in that space. But I think
what's the value of having diverse leaders? What is the value of having a group of leaders that look different, sound different, come from different backgrounds, and have different experiences?
Well, if you're selling any product that you want people to consume that's, if your consumer base is wide-ranging and representative of the country that you're living in, then your board should be reflective of that. Otherwise, you're not going to have the right perspective to make sure that you're creating products that your consumers are going to find useful. And, those consumers aren't going to be represented in what you do. The employees in your organization aren't going to be represented in the high-level decisions that are made in the organization. So it's incredibly important.
And we know right now in the US they're deprioritizing diversity in government, to put it lightly. What power does that have over the attention that EDI or DEI, whatever you want to call it, is by extension having in big companies in the US, in the UK, across the world? If one of the most powerful individuals on the face of the earth is saying it's not a priority, you can all go on paid leave, where does that leave the reputation of diversity, equality and inclusion?
I think we have to be patient. This is a long game. I personally think there was always going to be some form of a backlash. It was only a question of when and how much. I am hoping that what will happen is that people will recognize that this is not a zero-sum game, that actually diversity and inclusion is in everyone's interest. Because if business is about optimal decisions, utilization of resources, bottom line profitability, absolutely, I know from my own experience and career, if I hadn't gone through the hardships I had, if I didn't bring different perspectives and experiences, I couldn't have delivered the bottom line profitability that I did for GE and other employers I worked for. So I know in my mind cognitively, but also in my gut, that really this adds, diversity and inclusion adds to the bottom line. So I think we should operate not from a zero-sum game point of view, but from a win-win scenario. I thought we will have enough time to convince others, the white middle-aged man, for example, that actually, if they work with us, they support us, many of them supported me throughout my career, that we can make money for them and for ourselves. It's win-win. The problem with the current backlash, particularly from the US politics, is that it has hastened that backlash and it has increased the magnitude of the backlash too early for us to be able to demonstrate the win-win scenarios. And the other thing it does is that psychologically, for the rest of the populations around the world, it has normalized prejudice. It has normalized bias. It has normalized bad behavior. And I do hope that people are more intelligent than to fall for it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there, because I think that that's exactly it. It's kind of setting an example, isn't it, for people who are maybe more susceptible to jumping on trends like that. And so, I mean, certainly in the UK, I've noticed that there have been more, there's an increase in job adverts that will outline that they are looking for someone, maybe it's a position for someone with a disability, or, and they're quite specific. And I'm not sure how I feel about them. And do you think that they are the answer maybe to opening up more opportunities, is create these positions and say that in the job advert, it's only for people with a disability? Or should it be, I don't know, more inclusive from the start?
My feeling is that it should be more inclusive from the start, because I don't feel comfortable about that sort of thing either, that you're kind of specifying a specific type of person that this is going to be appropriate for, unless their experiences that they've had as a disabled person are crucial to be able to performing well on the job.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of thing could create even more backlash.
Yeah. So it does feel like they might have a quota, or it might not look good on paper, that there's a lack of maybe people with disabilities or people from diverse backgrounds, or a gender gap, or whatever that is. And then, it's almost like a tick box exercise when it gets to that point, I feel.
Yeah, and I don't feel like that is useful at all. And there's instances where certain things that we might think of as in the past as being a disadvantage become an advantage. So an example is people who are neurodivergent, possibly on the autism spectrum, are incredibly good at pattern recognition. In a way that if you're not neurodivergent, you would struggle with. You wouldn't be able to do that as well, because you wouldn't have that attention to detail or the patience to spend all that time looking for the patterns. So, it's not that, it's differences rather than, being disadvantaged, or that you should be disadvantaged, or that you're not bringing as much to the table, because that's just not true at all.
Yeah. I suppose my next question is, what is the business case for being a diverse, conscious leader? What are the benefits of that for leaders in business, leaders in life, people who, run teams? Why is it important to be conscious of diversity?
Yeah. So if you are a leader that's inclusive, then you're going to recognize diversity. That's one of the things that you would do as an inclusive leader, is that you're going to recognize the diversity of the people that are working with you. And in doing that, you would try to find out what their needs are. So what do you need to be able to do really well at your job? Do you need to be in situations where you're not given loads of information ahead of time, but we give it to you at the end, and then you're able to just take off and run with it? So, finding out what the needs are and the working styles of employees is really important, and the inclusive leaders can do that really well. And having a good understanding of the diversity and the different types of diversity, because there's lots of different types. Because I think that a lot of times we just think, that it's gender and ethnic background, but there's many, many different types of diversity.
Like, look at us. We're 3 women, but there's a lot more going on.
But there's a lot more going on.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're from 3 different countries. We've lived in many different countries across the world, right? As we found out. So we bring lots of different perspectives with us and working styles and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that it's important that inclusive leaders spend that time trying to find out, so then they can learn and understand how their organizations, their work groups can be really effective and come up with really creative and innovative ideas and solutions to problems.
Yeah. So what kind of leader do you hope then that the mentees that are going through migrant leaders now, what kind of leader do you hope they end up, well, firstly working under and then becoming one day, hopefully? What are the traits of that person that's the ideal leader that is conscious and bears this in mind and use diversity to its advantage?
It's interesting you should ask that, because 8 years ago, I was asking myself that question. It was the beginnings of thinking about migrant leaders, even before the Parker Review. What am I doing for the next generation? Maybe that's why I wasn't feeling satisfied fully in my EY job. What am I really doing for the next generation? How many people am I really affecting? What was the point of all that hardship then? And I developed what I called the young leader model, which predictably, it's being a leadership model, has 4 quadrants around having ambition, productivity, leading yourself and leading others. And around that model, there are 52 characteristics, where the young leader model that we have at Migrant Leaders as a result has 52 characteristics around empathy, decisiveness, ambition, and so on, respect, gratitude, things like that. But if I had to summarize it, I do hope that the next generation will have more sympathy. Because I myself find that, having been corporate trained, at the beginning, I wasn't as sympathetic perhaps as I am now. And in effect, I was thinking of organizational design as a bunch of square jobs, and I was trying to fit all the triangles and rectangles and circles and everyone into those jobs that were already designed. What I did for migrant leaders was the opposite. Intuitively, I think my own leadership style and thinking had evolved over the last 20 years, whereby I thought, okay, the kind of leader that each person is, their working style, the way they work with others, the way they do their own work and liaise with our customers and stakeholders, the kind of person and leader they are is a function of the experiences that they've gone through. That's why it's important for leaders to understand their people and where they come from, what hardships they've had, what family situation they have, what motivates them. Because that will then determine the kind of job, targets, results, and job activities would suit their background and their character and their technical capabilities. So in a way, with migrant leaders, instead of putting people in jobs I had already designed, I was aware of the process taxonomy for migrant leaders, and I designed jobs for the people and their best capabilities. I hope that more young people in the next generation and more organizations design jobs with that in mind, with people's complexities in mind. If you're a good manager, if you're a good leader, you can do that in your time. It doesn't take that much time. It just takes perspective. And if you're not a good leader, then why are you paid a leadership salary? Because you're not doing the job.
No.
And if you're not helping people do the job and you're not doing the doing, then why are you paid those salaries? This is leadership.
Yeah, playing to people's strengths is huge. And what would you say makes a good leader in that sense?
I think that another important thing that leaders need to do is create psychological safety in the workplace. So people feel like they can have their voices heard. So if they see something that isn't right, if something isn't working for them, if they need to have more flexibility in something, or if they just want their perspective to be heard about a situation that's happening and they feel like they can contribute to that, it's really up to the leader to make sure that they've created an environment where there's psychological safety and people feel like they're not going to be punished for what they say.
Yeah.
If it's maybe not in alignment with the leader or with someone else who's in power in the organization, because it's important to get those perspectives. So I'd say psychological safety.
Yeah, that's huge. It's interesting that you say sympathy and that was something that you developed, because in my mind, for someone such as yourself who has faced so much and been through so much, and then you're working with a community of migrants who, again, they've probably faced some similar challenges, to not bear sympathy in mind just from the beginning is astonishing. But it's a kind of space, isn't there, between sympathy and empathy? You've seen what they've been through. So how did you develop that? Where did that kind of come from in you?
I think listening to people and their stories and how they feel about different situations. I think that sympathy was always within me, but I was careful not to display it in front of my bosses too readily, because, put it in context, my time at GE was 25 years ago in an engineering company, very male-dominated, very white. So I was very conscious of what I can display and what I can't display, and what is psychological, what is safe. So psychological safety wasn't an open concept back then, but I now realize we were so busy trying to fit in that actually we couldn't have been psychologically safe. I do remember so many situations where listening helped. For example, when I first got that first job in GE, and I went and introduced myself to my new finance team, one of the senior team members came into my office and said, "I'm not working with someone almost half my age. I can't imagine why they put you in this job." And I could have pulled rank in that moment and said, "Well, excuse me, these are the reporting lines. GE has given me this job, and that's that." But I did the opposite. I thought, try and understand what she's feeling. They've just been acquired by GE. They feel threatened. They feel unappreciated. Yeah, she is more experienced than me as an accountant. And maybe I've got something to gain by working with her. I've got something to learn from her. So I said that to her. I said, "I hear you. I hear you." And actually that pivot and that sympathy, if you like, in that moment meant that she was one of my biggest advocates. Something turned by showing that sympathy at that moment. And a few months later, we achieved phenomenal results in the GE internal audit as a team. And we celebrated like we had been a team for 20 years together. So sympathy is so powerful. Humans, every human is capable of unbelievable achievements. Every human. You hear the superhuman stories. Every human is superhuman. And to get the best out of people, you need to get under the bonnet of who they are, what motivates them, what hardships they've gone through, what are their current fears. And that's why sympathy is, I think, or empathy, whatever you name it. I am, after all, only a migrant. My wording might not be perfect, but that is the biggest and most powerful leadership tool.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And it's interesting that you touch on age there, because I'm quite interested in age bias and exactly that, you know, someone coming to you and saying you're young, you're not as experienced as me. Well, you know, what does that mean? If you're comparing experiences, is it what you've been through? Or is it just how many years you've been doing it and the benefits and what you can bring to a team, and where that difference is? So what role do you think bias plays, whether it's conscious or unconscious, in a leadership space where you've got teams coming together, and maybe an example like Elham's where the leader is younger than everybody else, or the opposite, and you know, you get some guy who's, you know, we're doing it this way because we've always done it, and is that valuable?
Well, people of a particular age aren't a homogenous group, so you know, there's a lot of variation there. Right? And I love your story, because I think that it really shows the confidence that you had at that age, which, you know, probably is quite rare to be able to have that level of confidence, to be able to step back and take the time to think about how you might connect with that individual. And that might be something that comes for most people as they get a bit older, but not clearly not for everybody, right? So I think that, you know, saying that young people are like this and kind of painting their generation with a broad brushstroke, and saying older people are like this, you know, young people, they're all into social media and tech and blah, blah, blah. Older people don't have a clue about social media and tech, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's just not true. I mean, there's variation between all of those, and that's a really simple example. But there's some people who are older who always want to learn more. They always want more and more, and they want the latest things. They want to learn about the new trends that are coming. And there's some young people who don't want to know any of that. So, you know, by saying that, you know, older people are like this and younger people are like this is just really oversimplified, because there's a lot more that goes into it. It's the experiences that you've been through can give you a perspective, and maybe you've been through more of those experiences more quickly than
like
other people.
Building experiences, like
and
huge
you had those, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, some people who are older maybe haven't had to introspect and figure out their resilience and the fortitude that they have, that they bring and carry with them throughout every dimension of their lives.
That's true. You've given me a perspective on my own past. Thank you.
But it's really valuable though, because you see it's really heavily regulated, isn't it? You can't be ageist when you're employing, and you know, you've got to be accessible and open, but some jobs will still say this many years experience minimum. And who's to put a value on that experience in as far as years? So it's exactly what we were saying just then, because the value of the life experience that you had at that age versus anyone at any age might not ever have the same life experience as you had. So I think that's hugely vital and a really great point. So what would you say about bias, unconscious bias or physical bias, about in your experience? What have you kind of come up against that makes someone a good leader, a bad leader, an inclusive leader or not? Is there any kind of differing points that you've been able to maybe educate the people that you're working around?
I think a lens that I often talk about in my team and to others is when you're making certain decisions about whether someone's personal style or their attributes or their character or ways of doing things is right or wrong, see it from the perspective of results. Does their style or personal ways of doing things favorably or adversely affect their work performance? Does it affect favorably or adversely the end customer? And if it doesn't affect the end customer or the other stakeholders such as colleagues and vendors and suppliers, then their personal style is fine. But if it does affect things adversely, then we need to have a conversation. We do need these two things to converge, performance and diversity. Because I don't want us to move to a situation where we do diversity for the sake of diversity. It's really important that we keep the competitive and commercial perspective on diversity. Diversity and inclusion, utilized in the right way, can make companies more profitable and countries more competitive. It's really important that when we hire someone, yes, they're a diverse talent, but they had better have the characteristics and capabilities and experience needed to do the best in that job. That's really, really important if we are to avoid the backlash that we talked about earlier on. And also, as a country, we're going to be needing to compete with China, compete with so many other countries that are emerging as superpowers. For us to compete, we need to keep the commercial lens.
Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant point. And I think when earlier we touched on the putting specific job adverts out for specific areas of diversity. I think that's exactly what we were suggesting maybe, is that it was for diversity for the sake of diversity and not actually thinking about the bottom line, which is the job and the position and what the company needs of that person. So when we're talking about bias from a kind of decision-making perspective, how does behavioural science maybe offer leaders the tools to overcome these biases that maybe have existed for their whole lives?
Yeah, so we all have bias, and it doesn't make us bad for having them. It's something that allows us to have shortcuts and quickly understand a situation. But it's important to be aware that we have them and to recognize that, and then to think about what you're going to do about it, to try to not let yourself fall into traps that you might fall into. So, an example is confirmation bias that you hear talked about quite a lot now, that as we're finding ourselves exposed to certain types of information from outlets that we go to, certain outlets that we choose to go to. We ignore the other ones, right? So you're only getting one viewpoint by doing that. So you're confirming the pre-existing ideas that you already have by continuing to expose yourself to the same sources of information. So to guard against this is where diversity can help, is that you actively seek out these different voices that might be in opposition to your existing views about something. Make sure that those people feel comfortable to express their views. Go to information sources that you don't normally visit. See what they have to say. See what their arguments are. And I know it's really hard to do it because things have become so polarized. But that's one way to really see what's going on this other side, instead of just vilifying everything that doesn't fit into your bubble. Yeah.
And it's interesting that at the moment in 2025, diversity and inclusion, it's become controversial. And I think what you were saying earlier about how we haven't let it have enough time to prove its worth before it kicks off and the backlash starts, and we're kind of taking steps backwards. So if we're looking to the future and we're being optimistic, where do you hope the differences in perhaps some of the experiences that you had versus some of the mentees that you have within Migrant Leaders now, where do you hope that society has shifted, has moved on since then, and where might those differences be in their journeys?
I think any system or way of thinking that aims to eliminate human instinct for survival is doomed. So that sympathy that I talked about earlier, I might apply that sympathy to people who are from diverse backgrounds, but I ought to apply that to everyone else too. So I did what you said. I actually regularly look at certain newspapers and channels which are quite extreme and anti-migrant and anti-diversity, because I want to hear what are their fears, what's driving that. These are not bad people, yeah? Their human instinct is guiding them to instigate a backlash against diversity and inclusion. We need to listen to that. We need to see what are they feeling, what are their objections, what are their fears. The reality is, in the West, in the UK, for example, for decades and decades, the hard-working working classes have been ignored. NHS, education, social care, many things have not been adequately invested in. If you look at return on labor versus return on capital and economic growth, it doesn't take you long to work out that work does not pay. Capital pays. Wealth pays. So we have not been looking after the working classes. No wonder they want someone to blame. Yeah, no wonder. So what do we need to do for the hard-working working classes? We need to generate economic growth, jobs, new industries in the UK, in the US, new industries, innovative industries that's going to develop people, differentiate their talents. We need to look after the working class so that they come with us as diverse people. They are in the same pot. We are not that different.
No.
We need to listen to them.
And what have you heard anything from the cohorts that go through Migrant Leaders about their experiences? What are they kind of up against in today's society?
They are very scared. They talk about, since the US election and the backlash, many of them have expressed fears. And if I'm honest, I am for the first time feeling that fear in my body again.
Wow.
I remember when I first came here at the age of 13, I made lots of friends, but there were always one or two racist students at school. I remember two of them really decided to make my life hell and kept saying, go back where you came from. And once I answered back and I said, well, I wonder if we ask the teachers, do they want me leaving this school or you? And they got really angry. I remember their faces went red with anger, and they didn't do anything until I was walking home that day. And they basically stalked me, and they grabbed my ears and slapped me. And I went home and didn't tell anything to my parents. Made sure I calmed down enough so my parents can't tell. I didn't want to add to their problems. And the next day, I told those two girls defiantly that if they ever touch me again, I'll tell the head teacher and I'll get them expelled. So that kind of fear, I'm feeling it again after 30 years. So I know the young mentees are feeling it. And they tell me, they have the fear of the backlash, discrimination, violence, riots, all sorts of things. My guidance to them is keep calm. Keep calm. Don't engage with this. Laser sharp focus on the plan. Laser sharp focus. You're here to succeed. You're here to help yourself and your families and your communities. When you succeed, you can then give back to this country and demonstrate how good and useful you are as migrant families. Just have laser sharp focus on that plan. Don't engage with the discrimination. Because at the end of the day, if you make money for your communities, look after your communities and make money for the companies and colleagues you work with, they'll support you regardless of their background. The odd few who are racist and horrible are actually statistically insignificant. So they deserve to be ignored. That's my view.
It speaks so much, though, to the value of your leadership, though, there, because something we often talk about on Lead Out Loud as part of it's a leadership podcast, is the value of a role model in those examples, especially intergenerational role models. And I mean, that story I did about you, that just got me, because I think that, again, you are in a position of leadership with the cohorts, and you're able to say, this is where I've been through. You're honest about your fears, you're honest about how you're feeling, but managing to keep everybody on track in a kind of, with an inspirational kind of driving force is to your credit. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm just so sorry that you had that experience. It does demonstrate how you were able to have that fortitude and the resilience and strength that you've built up from those sorts of experiences. And your ability to have perspective, to kind of take yourself outside of it and realize that those bullies, they are insignificant in number and in character. Because, they are very small. And I think that sometimes they're able to find a platform in our current world which magnifies their voice in a way that is unrepresentative of their actual impact and the actual number of people who are in full agreement with what they're saying and doing. And I think that that's what gives me hope, is that most people, I like to believe, are good people, and we like to hear about other people's stories. We like to get to know people and hear about their journeys. And in doing that, we learn to embrace diversity, and we learn to see the true value of it.
Yeah, and I love I've always loved the concept of embracing diversity, because it does take away from the tick box exercise, and it's not for any other reason other than to do good, right? There's value in experience, and there's value in difference, and what you identified earlier about it was the social mobility more than anything, and then that's where you felt that you could do something, and I think that's fascinating. So I suppose my final question then to both of you is how much hope do you have for the future generation of leaders in getting this balance right, in moving away from tick box exercise and backlash and bias and prejudice, and doing exactly what you were describing, looking at the individual and their skills and what they bring to the table? Where do your hopes lie for future generations of leaders?
Well, personally, my hopes are with the Migrant Leaders mentees. Our ultimate objective at Migrant Leaders Charity is to train 10,000 young migrants and send them to the large corporates, because the corporates are a very good training ground for early careers. So I like to think that with that contribution to send 10,000 young migrants trained up, ready, confident to the corporates, we will make hopefully some contribution to the change that we would like. And in the meantime, I've been really trying to train them in their ways of thinking, so that they keep thinking win-win games, not zero-sum games, win-win scenarios, so that they keep contributing to the people around them, regardless of those people's backgrounds.
Amazing. And what about you, Dawn? What are you hoping for the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, I would say the world is it's a bigger but more connected place than it was. At the beginning when I was talking about the small little town that I grew up in, that was pretty isolated. I didn't know much about the world at all, or other people, or what their lives were like. And I think that because we're so much more connected now, if you look at like our MBA program, there's people from all over the world that come together. And I think it's those sorts of experiences where you really get to know people from different cultures that you learn to appreciate. And so that's my hope, is that we learn to get to know each other more and appreciate difference and really see the value in it. And I think that whether it happens in person or in online forums. I think that having that knowledge and understanding of difference can benefit our future leaders.
Right, brilliant. So I think some of the key takeaways for today, from me anyway, is to do with the diversity in leadership. It's not just about the representation side of things, but it's about fostering those environments and creating those environments where there's psychological safety and people feel sympathetic and empathetic to those around them, which is fascinating. And then overcoming that bias and fostering those inclusion and requiring the intentionality and empathy and that continuous learning that you touched on was great. So I wonder whether we might end today's episode with a tip from both of you to future leaders or current leaders looking to improve their skills and bring the best out of their teams. What is the one thing that you think will kind of push them to the next stage in properly embracing diversity to the best of their ability? We can have a minute to think if we need one.
I've got one.
Have you got one?
I'll give you a second. I would say talk less, listen more.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that one.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, totally. Brilliant. Thank you.
Mine is going to be a little bit controversial.
Okay.
As leaders, don't hesitate to think, what's in it for me? Because even from that lens, diversity will add value to your team. Think, what's in it for me in hiring this diverse talent? What's in it for me to be more sympathetic to this team member? You'll find that actually inclusive behaviors and diversity still deliver what's in it for you as a leader. Don't hesitate to think that way. Everyone can win.
No, that's brilliant and really interesting. So I'd like to thank you both for a great conversation. I absolutely love chatting with you both, so thank you. And just a reminder that you can keep up to date with all of the latest research from Warwick Business School and have that sent straight to your inbox with the Core Insights newsletter using that link below. And for all things WBS, you can follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok and Instagram, or visit the WBS website. And be sure to subscribe to the Lead Out Loud podcast. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.